Hello YouTube, this is Anthony Endor Masna. This is going to be my third video in my new series of iOS SDK tutorials. And in this video, we're going to take a look at how to implement navigation logic in your app. So one of the most common, or probably the most common theme in an iOS app is you have a series of table views, and by tapping on a row, the app performs this slide animation and navigates to another view, which often contains another table view, and the process is repeated. And the point is basically to allow the user to narrow in on one set of data or one data entry in your app, which they can do whatever with. If it's a song, they could play it. If it's a photo, they can view it, etc. So in this video, we're just going to make a few, I'm thinking maybe 3 different views where the first 2 will be table views, or will display table views, and the final one will just, in a large text label, display the data entry the user chose. So, of course, let's begin by opening Xcode and creating a new project. We'll choose single view application. So we're going to do all this. Actually, no, let's choose empty. Let's do this from scratch. Let's call this navigation logic. I'm going to put it on the desktop. Okay, so all we have is the app delegate. So if we run the app right now, all we should have is a white screen. So of course the window instance is initialized and displayed on screen as the main screen of the application. Okay, good. So actually, I've never seen this before. This must be somewhat new, but you can see here that there's a warning sort of in the console that says application windows are expected to have a root view controller at the end of the application launch. So what that's saying is the window instance here, the UI window instance that is the first, or which presents a visual representation of our app on the screen, doesn't have a root view controller property set, or it doesn't have its root view controller property set. So basically what the warning is saying is there isn't anything on the screen. So what we need to do is we need to create a view controller and set the view controller property of the window object here. So root view controller equals some kind of view controller, and then that view controller will be displayed on screen by default when the app launches. So since this is going to be an app that uses navigation logic, or that slide animation from one view to the next, we're going to need to set the root view controller as a UINavigationController. A UINavigationController is a fantastic class that Apple provides for us that handles exactly what we're trying to do in this app. It's a subclass of UIViewController, and what it does is it handles the navigation logic back and forth from one view to another. And it automatically adds that nice bar on top, the navigation bar that you see in so many apps, which provides each view with a title and then a back button once the user has pushed onto a new view. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a UIViewController in our code. A new UINavigationController. So UINavigationController, nav controller equals, and we're going to just allocate this. So we're going to use init with root view controller as the initialize method, but we don't have a view controller to initialize it with. So what this means is whatever we pass in here as the root view controller will be the first view controller the navigation controller shows, the default view controller. So now we have to create that first view controller. So let's take a break from this file, and we're going to go up to File, New, and add a new class. And we're going to make this a subclass of UIViewController, and we're going to call it First View Controller. And you see here we have with XIB or zib for user interface checked off, and what that means is when we create this new class, automatically Xcode will also generate an interface builder file, a zip file, to go along with this class. So when we initialize it later, we're going to initialize it with that interface file, and so the view controller's view will be taken from the interface builder file. And we're going to add it as a targeted for this app. Okay, so now we have our first viewcontroller.h, the header file, the .m file, and the zip file, the interface file. So if we open the interface file, all we have is just a blank view. And the file's owner, or the first view controller object here, its view property, is linked to that view. So first we're going to add a table view. Okay, so let's drag a table view onto this view. And if you don't know how to implement table views, please look at my earlier video, my second video on implementing a table view. So this isn't new to you. And we're going to connect the data source and the delegate outlets. So again, this table view will call to file's owner, which is an instance of first view controller for its data. I'm going to save. And now let's implement those methods. So the first one is number of sections in table view, and we tell the table view how many sections it should display. We're going to return 1. Next is table view number of rows and sections. So for now I'm just going to return 0. And the way we're going to set this up is we're going to add an instance variable to this first view controller, and it's going to be an NSArray instance. And an NSArray contains a set of objects. They can be any object, as long as they conform to, I think, the NSObject protocol. So I think they have to be either an NSObject or a subclass of NSObject. I'm not positive on that, but I'm pretty sure it has to be, because the way NSArray works is it uses certain methods to for example, sort, to store, to retrieve its objects, and I think those methods are all NSObject methods. So make sure any object you store in an NSArray is a subclass of NSObject. Okay, so let's add our curly braces so we can add an instance variable. So NSArray. We're just going to call this table view data, and we're going to initialize it in our initWithNibName method, because we're going to use this method to initialize an instance of our first view controller. So table view data equals NSArray alloc initWithObjects, and our objects are just going to be strings. So we're going to make a series of strings which will be presented in our table view. So let's just stick with 3 for now. And you have to end, when you provide a comma-separated list of objects to initialize your array with, you have to end it with nil so it knows where to stop. So now we have our array initialized, and so here, in our number of rows in our table view, in the section 1, section 0, we can return a count of how many objects are in our table view data array. And so that will return the number 3, since we have 3 objects in this array. Another last method, we provide for the table view a table view cell for each row. So I'm just going to run through this quickly. If you don't know what any of this means, please watch my table view video, so I don't have to waste time explaining this again. And so now we're going to set the text label's text equal to the object at the indexPath.row index of our array. So we can call to the table view data array object at index and just pass in indexPath.row. So for the first row, we're going to get the 0th object. For the second row, we'll get the first object, and for the third row, we'll get the second object. In the table view data array. Then we can return the cell. So now let's go back to our app delegate, and we have to import the first ViewController class so we can make an instance of it here. And so first before making our navigation controller, I'm going to create an instance of our first ViewController, allocate it, and init with nib, first ViewController, and bundle nil. I've explained before in previous videos that when you pass nil for the bundle, the method assumes to go to the main bundle, and any files in here, in the file navigator here, are assumed to be in the main bundle. You could achieve exactly the same effect by calling to the main bundle method for the NSBundle class. It's a class method which returns a link to the main bundle. So we'll leave that as the same thing. And now that we have an instance of first ViewController, when we create our navigation controller instance, we can pass in that first ViewController instance as the root ViewController for this navigation controller, and so that means it'll display first view first. And so now we can set the root ViewController of our window as NavController. And so let's launch the app and see what happens. Great, so we have a navigation controller which is displaying our first ViewController. Let's give this view a title. So again, I said before that one of the fantastic things about a navigation controller is it gives you the opportunity to give each view a title, and then it automatically adds back buttons as you push onto another view, and you can also add buttons that do other actions on the top right of the navigation bar. So really simply, first ViewController in the init method, let's give it a title, self.title, and the navigation controller will look to the title property of each individual ViewController as it displays it, so it knows what title to display in the navigation bar. So self.title equals first view. Let's run it again. Yep. Cool. Now our view has a title in the navigation bar. Now we need to make a second ViewController to push on from the first one. So file, new file. I'm going to make another UIViewController subclass, and we'll just call this one second ViewController. And we're basically going to do the same thing. So to save time, I'm going to copy all of this here, paste it in the second ViewController, right? We'll change the title here. And so now what we need to do is we're going to add some kind of logic here so that if the user selects the first row from the first ViewController, we'll display some set of data in the second ViewController. If they select the second row in the first view, we'll present another set of data in the second ViewController, and then if they select the third row in the first ViewController, we'll display again another set of data in the second ViewController. So I'm actually going to get rid of this here. We don't need this right now. So I'm thinking what we'll do is we'll use an if statement in which, depending on the row that was selected in the first ViewController, we're going to initialize our table view data array with different data. So we need to give this ViewController, the second ViewController, a property, an int property, so that this ViewController knows which row was selected in the previous ViewController, in the first ViewController. So we need to go to second ViewController.h and add a property. So int row selected previously is what we'll name it. And now we need to make it a property. Int row selected previously, and we need to initialize it. So I'm not going to get into how properties work, but to give a simple explanation, a property is basically a way of making an instance variable of a class in Objective-C public so that it can be accessed by other classes. So finally we have to synthesize the property, and now we can use it, and now it's accessible from other classes. By default, a property is read-write. You can make it read-only, but we need it to be writable because we're going to write to it from the previous ViewController. So now let's add the logic in the first view controller. Let's import our second view controller. Okay. And so now we need to implement a delegate method for the table view. We need to implement table view did select row at index path. This method will be called by the table view when the user selects a row on the table view with their finger by tapping on it. So there's no return type because there's nothing to return. It's not asking for anything back. It's simply giving us as the developer a notification and an opportunity to respond to a touch of a row. So table view did select row at index path, and it passes in an NS index path object containing the section and row that was tapped. So first, let's create an instance of our second view controller, same way we did before. And now we can set the second view property, the row previously selected property. So second view row selected previously equals index path.row. And then finally, this is where the navigation logic comes in. We can push this new view onto the navigation controller. So you can access the navigation controller that a UIViewController belongs in by using self.navigationController. So when you place a view controller inside a navigation controller, the navigation controller takes it upon itself to set the navigation controller property of that view controller so that later on from within that view controller you can access the navigation controller very easily. So we're going to call to a method push view controller second view. We're going to give it the second view to push and then animate it. If you want it to be animated with that slide effect, yes. If you don't want any animation and you want it to just instantaneously happen on the screen, you can pass in no. Now we have to go back to our second view controller and we have to initialize that table view data array with different data depending on which row was selected previously. But we can't do it in the init-with-nib method because if you take a look at how we've done this here in first view controller.m, when we set the row selected previously property, we've already initialized the second view, and so by the time we have set the row selected previously property, this code has already been executed and we don't have a chance to do anything with the row selected previously. In fact, at that point it won't have been set. So we need to use the Viewdidload method. The Viewdidload method is where you want to do basically any operations right before displaying the view. Actually, I think that it's already implemented here. So in this method is exactly where you want to do any kind of manipulation to the view right before it gets displayed. So we can initialize our table view data array, and then once the view appears, the table view will draw itself. So we're going to use an if statement. So first, if row selected previously equals 0, let's initialize the table view data array with two strings. The first one will be, how about 0, 1. Else if row selected previously equals 1, or the second row is tapped in the first view controller, we'll initialize the table view data array with 2 and 3. And then if the third row is tapped, and we can just use an else statement, table view data equals NS array with objects 4 and 5. But at this point, we actually haven't even created the table view in our zib, so let's just do that real fast. We're in second view controller .zib, and we're going to connect the data source to the files owner and the delegate to the files owner. All right. So now let's take a look at what we've got. So if a row is tapped, you can see the second view is pushed onto the navigation controller, and automatically a back button is added on the top of the top left side of the navigation bar with the title of the previous view controller, which in this case was first view. And we can go back and select a different row and again a different row. So you can see that depending on which row was selected, we have different sets of data in the second view controller. And now for our final view controller, let's just display in a very large text label what was selected in the second view controller. So again, File, New. We'll call this third view controller. Okay, and so we're going to follow the same format we've been following. We need to add a property for what row was selected. So we need to add a property for the data that was selected. So we'll make this an NS string. Give it a title. And so now let's go to the zib and add a big label. We'll center the text. Make the font size big. We'll even make it bold. Save. Now we need a link to that label so we can manipulate what it displays in our code. Connect the outlet. Save again. And in our Viewdidload method, big label.text equals selected data. And so now in our second view controller.m, let's import the third view. And then we need to implement that same TableViewDidSelectRow method. And we can grab the data that was selected with a call to object at index path, and then make an instance of our third view controller. Then we have to set the selected data property. And then we can push the same way we did before. And again, the navigation controller property will have been set by the navigation controller once we push the second view controller instance onto the navigation controller. So again, we can easily access it from within. And we use the same method, push view controller third view animated yes. And let's take a look and see if it works. We have an error somewhere. Oh, no, we don't. And exactly as we had hoped, the final data selected shows up in the big label on the third view. So that completes my third video in my new series. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for my next video.